Somebody call Philip J. Pierre for me. Tell him to watch this video because I'm going to tell you something. America has a lot of ammunition, but they have one main thing that's more even deadlier than the guns that they have, the ships that they take to sea, and the F 35 that they fly in the air. It's called propaganda. In that propaganda machine, it has live rounds, short and long range ballistic missiles, and it has the nuclear option. And they use it a lot when they're ready to destroy people and confuse people. Don't be misled. Let's get into this. Guys, welcome back to the program. I want you guys to stick with me through this program. Watch it to the very end because you need to understand where I'm coming from when I talk about this whole situation with the United States and St. Lucia. Philippe Japere made a statement. It was rebutted by the United States Embassy in Barbados. Philippe Japere made another statement and said he had no comment to make, which I think was the correct thing to do. But I will show you where that statement from the embassy in Barbados set out to do one thing, to deceive and to confuse. And I'll tell you something. The statement is crafted to sound clear and very diplomatic, but it's actually doing a lot of rhetorical sleight of hand. Okay? I'm going to show you what it says, what it avoids, and how that creates a lot of confusion, which America really wants. So what did the statement explicitly say? The advisory, when I read it, makes two main claims. The United States has not recently talked to St. Lucia about international education, quote unquote. This is a narrow, carefully limited denial. That's the first thing you need to understand. It says the United States respects countries' sovereign decisions regarding the education of their citizens. This asserts non-interference, places them in the clay, but not so. Then it shifts the topic. The US calls for an end to exploitation and forced labor in Cuba's overseas medical mission. This, my friends, is a political condemnation of Cuba, unrelated on the surface to St. Lucia or education. You have to understand how these Edomites operate, Where the confusion comes from is the A, not recently, is deliberately vague. You understand what I'm saying to you? Not recently is deliberately vague. It does not say, we have never talked about this. You get it now? We are not influencing St. Lucia. It only says, not recently, leaving it open. Past conversations, indirect pressure, ongoing discussions through maybe intermediaries. You understand what I'm saying here? I know sometimes it's a bit difficult to have faith in your Caribbean leaders because they've let us down so much, but sometimes you must have a little faith in them. And do not be bought and sold by the empire. The wording allows what I would say is plausible deniability while keeping pressure intact. You have to understand how these people operate now. It went on to state international education is likely a misdirection. So the controversy people are reacting to likely involves a number of things. You have the Cuba medical training, you have the Cuban doctors abroad, scholarships or placement, which is tied basically to the Cuban programs. Okay? So by labeling this international education, the statement does a number of things. It softens the issue. It avoids acknowledging labor, contracts, or migration policies, but it reframes a labor and diplomacy issue as a neutral academic one. What the embassy did is reframing alone can confuse readers who don't know the real issue here. And so the statement abruptly then moves from that and it pivots to what? It pivots to Cuba. I've never seen anything like that. It pivots to Cuba. This is the biggest red flag I have seen in this whole posting by the US Embassy. After denying talks with St. Lucia, it immediately condemns Cuban government overseas medical missions program. You understand where they're coming from here? Do you understand? This create what they call implicit linkages. So even though they deny talking to St. Lucia recently, they're clearly saying their position on Cuba's medical programs and remind regional governments what the US is disapprove of. So what happens here is that the message becomes, we're not telling you what to do, but here's what we think is immoral and unacceptable. That is not natural. That is something that they strategically did. And then this confuses the public. It mixes unrelated issues to blur accountability. You have to understand how these people operate. St. Lucia plus education, Cuba plus forced labor, US respects for sovereignty. So by bundling them together, the statement avoids addressing a specific allegation people are worried about. You understand what they did there? It forces you, the reader, to mentally connect dots the US won't openly confirm. This makes critics sound speculative even when concerns are reasonable. So people like me who would think outside of the box, when I gave you this analysis, they would say that he's just speculative. He doesn't know what he's talking about. You have to understand how these people operate. It uses moral language to override factual clarity. So you have words like exploitation inside there. You have forced labor. You have illegitimate regime. What these are emotionally loaded, and they shift attention away from whatever pressure was applied. Whether Caribbean states are influenced, whether doctors themselves consented or benefited, once morality enters, factual nuance disappears. You understand what I'm saying to you? So it sounds transparent while actually being very evasive. And the tone is very calm, official, and authoritative, which creates trust. But the content, my friend, the content answers questions no one asked, avoids direct denial of influence, and uses the timing language, not recently, instead of absolute. This is what I call classic bureaucratic obfuscation. And why statements like these are effective, I'll tell you why. They work because most readers skim. The denial sounds sufficient at first glance. The Cuba criticisms reassure US allies and domestic audiences. And critics are now forced to argue against implications, not explicit claims. So it's not lying, but what they're doing is controlling the narrative, controlling how it's framed. And if you look at it, the core takeaway from that whole thing is that the message is confusing by design, not by accident. It denies influence narrowly. It signals disapproval broadly, on the other hand, and it maintains diplomatic pressure without owning it. Listen, my friends, this allows multiple interpretations depending on the reader's politics, and that is why the Americans are able to work with many of our Caribbean people. If you walk away thinking the US says it respects sovereignty, but also seem to be warning countries about Cuba, that is exactly the intended effect they wanted it to have. They're confusing you. They're not confusing me. Never day nor night. Stick with Philip J. Pierre. You hear me? Stick with your leader I know it's difficult right now because Caribbean leaders have failed us so many times, but stick with your leader.